just turn around and leave me. The tear in my eye drops on the floor alongside my spear. My knees are drenching in the blood I spill just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. I never pray to God anymore. I'd rather no one hurt me. Redemption, I have waited for you to come and drown all my sin. My knees are drenching in the blood I spill just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in
Okay, let's go ahead and get going here, shall we? I went a little bit over my start time. I try not to have too long an introduction, but it happens. All right, so getting a little bit late start because I had my labels mixed up on videos, and they said I should have been reading chapter 9, and now I'm actually reading chapter 10. So I got all them fixed and updated on YouTube and all that, and now we can get into the chapter. So, Homeland, chapter 10, The Stain of Blood. Zaknafine is out of the house? Malice asked. I sent him and Risen to the academy to deliver a... this is an odd typo, sorry. I'm going to say message, but it's actually giving me F exclamation point LES dash SAGE. That's the kind of typos that are in this thing. So I'm going to say it's message to Virna. Briza explained. He shan't return for many hours, not before the light of Norbandel begins its descent. That is good, said Malice. You both understand your duties in this farce? Briza and Maya nodded. I have never heard of such a deception, Maya remarked. Is it necessary? It was planned for another of the house, Briza answered, looking to Matron Malice for confirmation, nearly 4 centuries ago. Yes, agreed Malice. The same was to be done to Zaknavine, but the unexpected death of Matron Vartha, my mother, disrupted the plans. That was when you became the matron mother, Maya said. Yes, replied Malice, though I had not passed my first century of life and was still training in Tinilith. It was not a pleasant time in the history of House Do'Urden. But we survived, said Briza. With the death of Matron Vartha, Nalfine and I became nobles of the house. The test on Zaknafine was never attempted, Maya reasoned. Too many other duties preceded it, Malice answered. We will try it on Drizzt, though, said Maya. The punishment of House Skenduus convinced me that this action has to be taken, said Malice. Yes, Briza agreed. Did you notice Drizzt's expression throughout the execution? I did, answered Maya. He was revolted. Unfitting for a drow warrior, said Malice, and so this duty is upon us. Drizzt will leave for the academy in a short time. We must stain his hands with drow blood and steal his innocence. It seems a lot of trouble for a male child, Briza grumbled. If Drizzt cannot adhere to our ways, then why do we not simply give him to Loth? I will bear no more children, Malice growled in response. Every member of this family is important if we are to gain prominence in the city. Secretly, Malice hoped for another gain in converting Drizzt to the evil ways of the drow. She hated Zaknafine as much as she desired him, and turning Drizzt into a drow warrior, a true heartless drow warrior, would distress the weapon master greatly. On with it then, Malice proclaimed. She clapped her hands, and a large chest walked in, supported by 8 animated spider legs. Behind it came a nervous goblin slave. Come, Byakyuk, Malice said in a comforting tone. Anxious to please, the slave bounded up before Malice's throne and held perfectly still as the matron mother went through the incantation of a long and complicated spell. Briza and Maya watched in admiration at their mother's skills. The little goblin's features bulged and twisted, and its skin darkened. A few minutes later, the slave had assumed the appearance of a male drow. Byakyuk looked at its features happily, not understanding that the transformation was merely a prelude to death. You are a drow soldier now, Maya said to it, and my champion. You must kill only a single inferior fighter to take your place as a free commoner of House Do'Urden. After 10 years as an indentured servant to the wicked Dark Elves, the goblin was more than eager. Malice rose and started out of the anteroom. Come, she ordered, and her 2 daughters, the goblin and the animated chest, fell in line behind her. They came upon Drizzt in the practice room, polishing the razor edge of his scimitars. He leaped straight up to silent attention at the sight of the unexpected visitors. Greetings, my son, Malice said in a tone more motherly than Drizzt had ever heard. We have a test for you this day, a simple task necessary for your acceptance into Mele Magthir. Maya moved before her mother. I am the youngest beside yourself, she declared. Thus I am granted the rights of challenge which I now execute. Drizzt stood confused. He had never heard of such a thing. Maya called the chest to her side and reverently opened the cover. You have your weapons and your powifwi, she explained. Now it is time for you to don the complete outfit of a noble of House Do'Urden. From the chest she pulled out a pair of high black boots and handed them to Drizzt. Drizzt eagerly slipped out of his normal boots and put on the new ones. They were incredibly soft, and they magically shifted and adjusted to a perfect fit on his feet. Drizzt knew the magic within them. They would allow him to move in absolute silence. Before he had even finished admiring them, though, Maya gave him the next gift, even more magnificent. Drizzt dropped his powifwi to the floor as he took a set of silvery chain mail. In all the realms there was no armor as supple and finely crafted as drow chainmail. It weighed no more than a heavy shirt and would bend as easily as silken cloth, yet would deflect the tip of a spear as surely as dwarven crafted plate mail. You fight with two weapons, Maya said, and therefore need no shield. But put your scimitars in this. It is more fitting to a drow noble. She handed Drizzt a black leather belt, its clasp a huge emerald, and its two scabbards richly decorated in jewels and gemstones. Prepare yourself, Malice said to Drizzt. The gifts must be earned. As Drizzt started to don the outfit, Malice moved beside the altered goblin, which stood nervously in the growing realization that its fight would be no simple task. When you kill him, the items will be yours, Malice promised. The goblin's smile returned tenfold. It could not comprehend that it had no chance against Drizzt. When Drizzt again fastened his powifwi around his neck, Maya introduced the phony drow soldier. This is Byuk, she said, my champion. You must defeat him to earn the gifts and your proper place in the family. Never doubting his abilities and thinking the contest to be a simple sparring match, Drizzt readily agreed. Let it begin, then, he said, drawing his scimitars from their lavish sheaths. Malice gave Byuk a comforting nod, and the goblin took up the sword and shield that Maya had provided and moved right in at Drizzt. Drizzt began slowly, trying to take a measure of his opponent, before attempting any daring offensive strikes. In only a moment, though, Drizzt realized how badly Byuk handled the sword and shield. Not knowing the truth of the creature's identity, Drizzt could hardly believe that a drow could show such ineptitude with weapons. He wondered if Byuk was baiting him, and with that thought continued his cautious approach. After a few more moments of Byuk's wild and off-balance swings, however... Oh, we are in an ad. Okay. Well, I will hold off. I'll go back to where he began slowly, because I'm not sure where it started. So we'll just reread a little bit of that once this ad is over in another 20 seconds. 10 seconds. Take the opportunity to have a drink. And I only do that for the people watching live. All right, so we're back. So I'm going to back up just a little bit. Drizzt began slowly, trying to take a measure of his opponent, before attempting any daring offensive strikes. In only a moment, though, Drizzt realized how badly Byuk handled the sword and shield. Not knowing the truth of the creature's identity, Drizzt could hardly believe that a drow could show such ineptitude with weapons. He wondered if Byuk was baiting him, and with that thought continued his cautious approach. After a few more moments of Byuk's wild and off-balance swings, however, Drizzt felt compelled to take the initiative. He slapped one scimitar against Byuk's shield. The goblin drow responded with a lumbering thrust, and Drizzt slapped his sword from its hand with his free blade and executed a simple twist that brought the scimitar's tip to a halt against the hollow of Byuk's chest. Too easy, Drizzt muttered under his breath. But the true test had only begun. On cue, Brizza cast a mind-numbing spell on the goblin, freezing it in its helpless position. Still aware of its predicament, Byuk tried to dive away, but Brizza's spell held it still. Finish the strike, Malice said to Drizzt. Drizzt looked at his scimitar, then to Malice, unable to believe what he was hearing. Maya's champion must be killed, Brizza snarled. I cannot, Drizzt began. Kill, Malice roared, and this time the word carried the weight of a magical command. Thrust, Brizza likewise commanded. Drizzt felt their words compelling his hand to action. Thoroughly disgusted with the thought of murdering a helpless foe, he concentrated with all his mental strength to resist. While he managed to deny the command for a few seconds, Drizzt found that he could not pull the weapon away. Kill, Malice screamed. Strike, yelled Brizza. It went on for several more agonizing seconds. Sweat beaded on Drizzt's brow. Then the young drow's willpower broke. His scimitar slipped quickly between Byuk-Yuk's ribs and found the unfortunate creature's heart. Briza released Byuk-Yuk from her holding spell then, to let Drizzt see the agony on the phony drow's face and hear the gurgles as the dying Byuk-Yuk slipped to the floor. Drizzt could not find his breath as he stared at his blood-stained weapon. It was Maya's turn to act. She clipped Drizzt on the shoulder with her mace, knocking him to the floor. "You killed my champion," she growled. "Now you must fight me." Drizzt rolled back to his feet, away from the enraged female. He had no intention of fighting, but before he could even drop his weapons, Malice read his thoughts and warned, "If you do not fight, Maya will kill you." "This is not the way," Drizzt protested, but his words were lost in the ring of adamantite as he parried a heavy blow with one scimitar. He was now into it, whether he liked it or not. Maya was a skilled fighter. All females spent many hours training with weapons, and she was stronger than Drizzt. But Drizzt was Zack's son, the prime student, and when he admitted to himself that he had no way out of this predicament, he came in at Maya's mace and shield with every cunning maneuver he had been taught. Scimitars weaved and dipped in a dance that awed Briza and Maya. Malice hardly noticed, caught in the midst of yet another mighty spell. Malice never doubted that Drizzt could defeat his sister, and she had incorporated her expectations into the plan. Drizzt's moves were all defensive as he continued to hope for some semblance of sanity to come over his mother, and that this whole thing would be stopped. He wanted to back Maya up, cause her to stumble, and end the fight by putting her in a helpless position. Drizzt had to believe that Briza and Malice would not compel him to kill Maya as he had killed Byuk-Yuk. Finally, Maya did slip. She threw her shield out to deflect an arcing scimitar, but became overbalanced in the block, and her arm went wide. Drizzt's other blade knifed in only to nick at Maya's breast and force her back. Malice's spell caught the weapon in mid-thrust. The blood-stained adamantite blade writhed to life, and Drizzt found himself holding the tail of a serpent, a fanged viper that turned back against him. The enchanted snake spat its venom in Drizzt's eyes, blinding him. Then he felt the pain of Briza's whip. All six snake heads of the awful weapon bit into Drizzt's back, tearing through his new armor and jolting him in excruciating pain. He crumbled down into a curled position, helpless as Briza snapped the whip in again and again. "Never strike at a drow female," she screamed as she beat Drizzt into unconsciousness. An hour later, Drizzt opened his eyes. He was in his bed, Matron Malice standing over him. The High Priestess had tended to his wounds, but the sting remained, a vivid reminder of the lesson. But it was not nearly as vivid as the blood that still stained Drizzt's scimitar. "The armor will be replaced," Malice said to him. "You are a drow warrior now. You have earned it." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving Drizzt to his pain and his fallen innocence. "Do not send him," Zack argued as emphatically as he dared. He stared up at Matron Malice, the smug queen on her high throne of stone and black velvet. As always, Briza and Maya stood obediently by her sides. "He is a drow warrior," Malice replied, her tone still controlled. "He must go to the academy. It is our way." Zack looked almost helpless. He hated this place, the chapel anteroom with its sculptures of the Spider Queen leering down at him from every angle, and with Malice sitting towering above him from her seat of power. Zack shook the images away and regained his courage. He reminded himself that this time he had something worth arguing about. "Do not send him," he growled. "They will ruin him." Matron Malice's hands clenched down on the rock arms of her great chair. "Already Drizzt is more skilled than half of those in the academy," Zack continued quickly, before the matron's anger burst forth. "Allow me 2 more years, and I will make him the finest swordsman in all of Menzoberranzan." Malice eased back on her seat. From what she had seen of her son's progress, she could not deny the possibilities of Zack's claim. "He goes," she said calmly. "There is more to the making of a drow warrior than skill with weapons. Drizzt has other lessons he must learn." Lessons of treachery. Zack spat, too angry to care about the consequences. Drizzt had told him what Malice and her evil daughters had done that day, and Zack was wise enough to understand their actions. Their lesson had nearly broken the boy, and had perhaps forever stolen from Drizzt the ideals he held so dear. Drizzt would find his morals and principles harder to cling to now that the pedestal of purity had been knocked out from under him. "Watch your tongue, Zaknafine," Matron Malice warned. "I fight with passion," the weapon master snapped. "That is why I win. Your son, too, fights with passion. Do not let the conforming ways of the Academy take that from him." "Leave us," Malice instructed her daughters. Maya bowed and rushed out through the door. Briza followed more slowly, pausing to cast a suspicious eye upon Zack. Zack didn't return the glare, but he entertained a fantasy concerning his sword and Briza's smug smile. "Zaknafine," Malice began, again coming forward in her chair, "I have tolerated your blasphemous beliefs through these many years because of your skill with weapons. You have taught my soldiers well, and your love of killing drow, particularly clerics of the Spider Queen, has aided the ascent of House Do'Urden. I am not and have not been ungrateful. But I warn you now one final time that Drizzt is my son, not his sire's. He will go to the Academy and learn what he must to take his place as a prince of House Do'Urden. If you interfere with what must be Zaknafine, I will no longer turn my eyes from your actions. Your heart will be given to Loth." Zack stamped his heels on the floor and snapped a short bow of his head, then spun around and departed, trying to find some option in this dark and hopeless picture. As he made his way through the main corridor, he again heard in his mind the screams of the dying children of House Devere, children who never got the chance to witness the evils of the Drow Academy. Perhaps they were better off dead. And that's actually the end of chapter 10. So let me see how long chapter 11 is, and I'll decide whether I'm going to do another one. I probably will. Okay. Oops, I passed it. The chapter breaks are there are no breaks. It's just a line. It just goes and then says chapter 11. So it's hard to see sometimes. Okay, chapter 11, Grim Preference. Zack slid one of his swords from its scabbard and admired the weapon's wondrous detail. This sword, as with most of the drow weapons, had been forged by the Grey Dwarves, then traded to Menzoberranzan. The Duergar workmanship was exquisite, but it was the work done on the weapon after the Dark Elves had acquired it that made it so very special. None of the races of the Surface or Underdark could outdo the Dark Elves in the art of enchanting weapons. Imbued with the strange emanations of the Underdark, the magical power unique to the lightless world, and blessed by the unholy clerics of Loth, no blade ever sat in a wielder's hand more ready to kill. Other races, mostly dwarves and surface elves, also took pride in their crafted weapons. Fine swords and mighty hammers hung over mantels as showpieces, always with a bard nearby to spout the accompanying legend that most often began in the days of yore. Drow weapons were different, never showpieces. They were locked in the necessity of the present, never in reminiscences, and their purpose remained unchanged for as long as they held an edge fine enough for battle, fine enough to kill. Zack brought the blade up before his eyes. In his hands, the sword had become more than an instrument of battle. It was an extension of his rage, his answer to an existence he could not accept. It was his answer, too, perhaps, to another problem that seemed to have no resolution. He walked into the training hall where Drizzt was hard at work spinning attack routines against a practice dummy. Zack paused to watch the young drow at practice, wondering if Drizzt would ever again consider the dance of weapons a form of play. How the scimitars flowed in Drizzt's hands. Interweaving with uncanny precision, each blade seemed to anticipate the other's moves and whirred about in perfect complement. This young drow might soon be an unrivaled fighter, a master beyond Zaknafine himself. "Can you survive?" Zack whispered. "Have you the heart of a drow warrior?" Zack hoped that the answer would be an emphatic no, but either way Drizzt was surely doomed. Zack looked down at his sword again and knew what he must do. He slid its sister blade from its sheath and started a determined walk toward Drizzt. Drizzt saw him coming and turned at the ready. "A final fight before I leave for the academy?" He laughed. Zack paused to take note of Drizzt's smile. A facade? Or had the young drow really forgiven himself for his actions against Maya's champion? It did not matter, Zack reminded himself. Even if Drizzt had recovered from his mother's torments, the academy would destroy him. The weapon master had said nothing. He just came on in a flurry of cuts and stabs that put Drizzt immediately on the defensive. Drizzt took it in stride, not yet realizing that this final encounter with his mentor was much more than their customary sparring. "I will remember everything you taught me," Drizzt promised, dodging a cut and launching a fierce counter of his own. "I will carve my name in the halls of Mele Mcthir and make you proud." The scowl on Zack's face surprised Drizzt, and the young drow grew even more confused when the weapon master's next attack sent a sword knifing straight at his heart. Drizzt leapt aside, slapping at the blade in sheer desperation, and narrowly avoided impalement. "Are you so very sure of yourself?" Zack growled, stubbornly pursuing Drizzt. Drizzt set himself as their blades met in ringing fury. "I am a fighter," he declared, "a drow warrior." "You were a dancer," Zack shot back in a derisive tone. He slammed his sword into Drizzt's blocking scimitar so savagely that the young drow's arm tingled. "An impostor," Zack cried. "A pretender to a title you cannot begin to understand." Drizzt went on the offensive. Fires burned in his lavender eyes, and new strength guided his scimitars. Sure cuts. But Zack was relentless. He fended the attacks and continued his lesson. "Do you know the emotions of murder?" he spat. "Have you reconciled yourself to the act you committed?" Drizzt's only answers were a frustrated growl and a renewed attack. "Ah, the pleasure of plunging your sword into the bosom of a high priestess," Zack taunted. "To see the light of warmth leave her body while her lips utter silent curses in your face. Or have you ever heard the screams of dying children?" Drizzt let up his attack, but Zack would not allow a break. The weapon master came back on the offensive, each thrust aimed for a vital area. "How loud those screams," Zack continued. "They echo over the centuries in your mind. They chase you down the paths of your entire life." Zack halted the action so that Drizzt might weigh his every word. "You have never heard them, have you, dancer?" The weapon master stretched his arms out wide, an invitation. "Come, then, and claim your second kill," he said, tapping his stomach, "in the belly where the pain is greatest, so that my screams may echo in your mind. Prove to me that you are the drow warrior you claim to be." The tips of Drizzt's scimitars slowly made their way to the stone floor. He wore no smile now. "You hesitate," Zack laughed at him. "This is your chance to make your name. A single thrust and you will send a reputation into the academy before you. Other students, even masters, will whisper your name as you pass. 'Drizzt Do'Urden,' they will say, 'the boy who slew the most honored weapon master in all of Menzoberranzan.' Is this not what you desire?" "Damn you!" Drizzt spat back, but still he made no move to attack. "Drow warrior," Zack chided him. Do not be so quick to claim a title you cannot begin to understand. Drizzt came on then, in a fury he had never before known. His purpose was not to kill, but to defeat his teacher, to steal the taunt from Zack's mouth with a fighting display too impressive to be derided. Drizzt was brilliant. He followed every move with three others and worked Zack low and high, inside and out, wide. Zack found his heels under him more often than the balls of his feet. Too involved was he in staying away from his students' relentless thrusts to even think of taking the offensive. He allowed Drizzt to continue the initiative for many minutes, dreading its conclusion, the outcome he had already decided to be the most preferable. Zack then found that he could stand the delay no longer. He sent one sword out in a lazy thrust, and Drizzt promptly slapped the weapon out of his hand. Even as the young drow came on in anticipation of victory, Zack slipped his empty hand into a pouch and grabbed a magical little ceramic ball, one of those that so often had aided him in battle. "Not this time, Zack Define," Drizzt proclaimed, keeping his attacks under control, remembering well the many occasions that Zack reversed feigned disadvantage into clear advantage. Zack fingered the ball, unable to come to terms with what he must do. Drizzt walked him through an attack sequence, then another, measuring the advantage he had gained in stealing a weapon. Confident in his position, Drizzt came in low and hard with a single thrust. Though Zack was distracted at the time, he still managed to block the attack with his remaining sword. Drizzt's other scimitar slashed down on top of the sword, pinning its tip to the floor. In the same lightning movement, Drizzt slipped his first blade free of Zack's parry and brought it up and around, stopping just barely an inch from Zack's throat. "I have you!" the young drow cried. Zack's answer came in an explosion of light beyond anything Drizzt had ever imagined. Pause. Zack hadn't expected the parry. He recoiled and came in from a different angle. Again, he was foiled. What? I think we skipped a part again. What the hell? Oh, I just jumped ahead 2 pages. Okay. Zack had prudently closed his eyes, but Drizzt, surprised, could not accept the sudden change. His head burned in agony, and he reeled backwards, trying to get away from the light, away from the weapon master. Keeping his eyes tightly shut, Zack had already divorced himself from the need of vision. He let his keen ears guide him now, and Drizzt, shuffling and stumbling, was an easy target to discern. In a single motion, the whip came off Zack's belt, and he lashed out, catching Drizzt around the ankles and dropping him to the floor. Methodically, the weapon master came on, dreading every step but knowing his chosen course of action to be correct. Drizzt realized that he was being stalked, but he could not understand the motive. The light had stunned him, but he was more surprised by Zack's continuation of the battle. Drizzt set himself unable to escape the trap and tried to think his way around his loss of sight. He had to feel the flow of battle, to hear the sounds of his attacker, and anticipate each coming strike. He brought his scimitars up just in time to block a sword chop that would have split his skull. Zack hadn't expected the parry. He recoiled and came in from a different angle. Again he was foiled. Now more curious than wanting to kill Drizzt, the weapon master went through a series of attacks, sending his sword into motions that would have sliced through the defenses of many who could see him. Blinded, Drizzt fought him off, putting a scimitar in line with each new thrust. "Treachery!" Drizzt yelled, painful residual explosions from the bright light still bursting inside his head. He blocked another attack and tried to regain his footing, realizing that he had little chance of continuing to fend off the weapon master from a prone position. The pain of the stinging light was too great, though, and Drizzt, barely holding the edge of consciousness, stumbled back to the stone, losing one scimitar in the process. He spun over wildly, knowing that Zack was closing in. The other scimitar was knocked from his hand. "Treachery!" Drizzt growled again. "Do you so hate to lose?" "Do you not understand?" Zack yelled back at him. To lose is to die. You may win 1,000 fights, but you can only lose one. He put his sword in line with Drizzt's throat. It would be a single clean blow. He knew that he should do it, mercifully, before the masters of the academy got hold of his charge. Zack sent his sword spinning across the room, and he reached out with his empty hands, grabbing Drizzt by the front of his shirt and hoisted him to his feet. They stood face to face, neither seeing the other very well in the blinding glare, and neither able to break the tense silence. After a long and breathless moment, the dwemer of the enchanted pebble faded, and the room became more comfortable. Truly, the two dark elves looked upon each other in a different light. A trick of Loth's clerics, Zack explained. Always they keep such a spell of light at the ready. A strange smile crossed his face as he tried to ease Drizzt's anger. Although I dare say that I have turned such light against clerics, even high priestesses, more than a few times. Treachery, Drizzt spat a third time. It is our way, Zack replied. You will learn. It is our way, snarled Drizzt. You grin when you speak of murdering clerics of the Spider Queen. Do you so enjoy killing? Killing drow? Zack could not find an answer to the accusing question. Drizzt's words hurt him profoundly because they rang of truth, and because Zack had come to view his penchant for killing clerics of Loth as a cowardly response to his own unanswerable frustrations. You would have killed me, Drizzt said bluntly. But I did not, Zack retorted, and now you live to go to the academy to take a dagger in the back because you are blind to the realities of our world, because you refuse to acknowledge what your people are. Or you will become one of them, Zack growled. Either way, the Drizzt Do'Urden I have known will surely die. Drizzt's face twisted, and he couldn't even find the words to dispute the possibilities Zack was spitting at him. He felt the blood drain from his face, though his heart raged. He walked away, letting his glare linger on Zack for many steps. Go then, Drizzt Do'Urden, Zack cried after him. Go to the academy and bask in the glory of your prowess. Remember, though, the consequences of such skills. Always there are consequences. Zack retreated to the security of his private chamber. The door to the room closed behind the weapon master with such a sound of finality that it spun Zack back to face its empty stone. Go then, Drizzt Do'Urden, he whispered in quiet lament. Go to the academy and learn who you really are. Dynan came for his brother early the next morning. Drizzt slowly left the training room, looking back over his shoulder every few steps to see if Zack would come out and attack him again or bid him farewell. He knew in his heart that Zack would not. Drizzt had thought them friends, had believed that the bond he and Zaknafine had sown went far beyond the simple lessons in swordplay. The young drow had no answers to the many questions spinning in his mind, and the person who had been his teacher for the last 5 years had nothing left to offer him. The heat grows in Narbondel, Dynan remarked, when they stepped out onto the balcony. We must not be late for your first day in the academy. Drizzt looked out into the myriad colors and shapes that composed Menzoberranzan. What is this place? He whispered, realizing how little he knew of his homeland, beyond the walls of his own house. Zack's words, Zack's rage, pressed in on Drizzt as he stood there, reminding him of his ignorance and hinting at a dark path ahead. This is the world, Dynan replied, though Drizzt's question had been rhetorical. Do not worry, second boy, he laughed, moving up onto the railing. You will learn of Menzoberranzan in the academy. You will learn who you are and who your people are. The declaration unsettled Drizzt, perhaps remembering his last bitter encounter with the drow he had most trusted. That knowledge was exactly what he was afraid of. He shrugged in resignation and followed Dynan over the balcony in a magical descent to the compound floor, the first steps down that dark path. Another set of eyes watched intent as Dynan and Drizzt started out from House Do'Urden. Alton Devere sat quietly against the side of a gigantic mushroom, as he had every day for the last week, staring at the Do'Urden complex. Daemon na Bernan, ninth house of Menzoberranzan, the house that had murdered his matron, his sisters and brothers, and all there ever was of House Devere, except for Alton. Alton thought back to the days of House Devere when matron Guinevere had gathered the family members together so that they might discuss their aspirations. Alton, just a student when House Devere fell, now had a greater insight to those times. 20 years had brought a wealth of experience. Guinevere had been the youngest matron among the ruling families, and her potential had seemed unlimited. Then she had aided a gnomish patrol, had used her loath-given powers to hinder the drow elves that ambushed the little people in the caverns outside Menzoberranzan, all because Guinevere desired the death of a single member of that attacking drow party, a wizard son of the city's third house, the house labeled as House Devere's next victim. The Spider Queen took exception to Guinevere's choice of weapons. Deep gnomes were the Dark Elves' worst enemy in the whole of the Underdark. With Guinevere fallen out of Loth's favor, House Devere had been doomed. Alton had spent 20 years trying to learn of his enemies, trying to discover which drow family had taken advantage of his mother's mistake and had slaughtered his kin. 20 long years, and then his adopted matron, Sinefe Hunnet, had ended his quest as abruptly as it had begun. Now, as Alton sat watching the guilty house, he knew only one thing for certain. 20 years had done nothing to diminish his rage. And that ends part 2 of the book. We go into part 3 next time, the Academy. So, we'll leave it off there. And let's see. I am not going to raid tonight. I'm just going to end it. So I will see you all next time.
Calling to say I just calling to say I